Hello, lovelies, and welcome back to Seriously Now. I'm Lex Carline, and I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. Now, today is a little bit different because I'm recording at night. Normally I do it during the day when my daughter's at school for obvious reasons. But it's her birthday this week, so yeah, we do really well in this house. 2 birthdays in 6 days. So if I'm sounding a little bit more tired than normal, that's probably why. Now, you may have heard of this week's case under another name, such as Rasputin of the Bronx or the indestructible Michael Malloy, because this guy just wouldn't die. He survived numerous attempts on his life, with some saying that it was even as high as 20 before one finally stuck. Not much is really known about his early life, unfortunately. Malloy's birth certificate, immigration papers, etc. are elusive, but his legend is cemented in history. We do know that Malloy was an Irishman, born in County Donegal, and that he was a firefighter. He is said to have moved stateside in the 1920s in search of that American dream that so many were after. Sadly, though, like, again, so many others, he would never find it. In the 1930s, New York was floored by the Great Depression. Jobs and homes were lost, the financial structure crumbled. It was a desperate time. And sadly, people were earning money in whatever way they could. People still doing that today, so... This was also the time in the USA of the Prohibition. This ran from 1920 to 1933, and it was a nationwide constitutional law prohibiting the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. Oh no! Speakeasies, therefore, were prominent in this period, and they were illicit establishments that sold alcohol. By late 1932, Malloy was homeless, unemployed, and, despite the prohibition, so quite impressive really, an alcoholic. It's said he rarely paid his bar tabs, and the local speakeasies were tired of how much he was consuming. But I have a simple question here. Why would you continue letting him have tabs? Yeah? Seems like a pretty simple answer to the question. Malloy would literally wait outside the speakeasies every morning for them to open. One of these establishments was called the Mermaid, and this was owned by Tony Marino. Just realised I have got the dogs in here tonight, so if you do hear any snuffling, it's just Echo and Jake. And the coughing in the next room is the child. Yeah, it's going to be one of those nights. So Marino and some of his associates noticed that Malloy was a loner, and he seemed to have no friends or family. And unsurprisingly, given the economic climate, Marino's business was not doing very well. Money and how to make it was a very popular topic of the day, and Marino and his associates decided that something needed to be done about Malloy. One night, Marino nodded towards Malloy and said to his acquaintance, Francis Pasqua, "He looks all in. He ain't got much longer to go anyhow. The stuff is getting him." The stuff obviously being alcohol. Now, Pasqua was an undertaker, and he suggested taking out an insurance policy on Malloy and said that he could take care of the rest. Because obviously, easy body disposal there, isn't it? And as such, a scheme was born. Harebrained springs to mind. The two would also bring on board Daniel Kreisberg, who was a grocer, Hershey Harry Green, a taxi driver, and Joseph Red Murphy, who was the bartender at the Mermaid. Now, I will call Joseph Red, as there is a Joseph Murray later in the story, which is very close to Murphy, and lots of other surnames beginning with M, so it just makes it a little bit easier. Now, these guys were the alleged core members, but there was also Tough Tony Bastone, who would do anything for the right price, and his sidekick Joseph Maglione, and petty criminals John McNally and Edward Tinier Smith, who had a fake ear, but it was made of wax, not tin. They would later, by the press, be dubbed the Murder Trust. Surely we could have come up with a better name than that. But okay. Now, a quote by the Daily Mirror said that Mike looked like an easy mark. He was just part of the flotsam and jetsam in the current underworld speakeasy life, those no longer responsible derelicts who stumble through the last days of their lives in a continual haze of Bowery smoke. Now, Bowery, if I'm saying that right, sorry if I'm not, is a district known for cheap bars and derelicts. If you've seen Gangs of New York, yes, that place. Now, Marino had successfully completed an insurance murder scam in early 1932. And it's late 1932 that they were talking about doing away with Malloy as well, so very recently. On March the 17th of that year, Mabel Carson, who was said to be from a well-to-do Washington, D.C. family, was a hairdresser who too had fallen on hard times. We can speculate as to why she just didn't go home. Maybe she was ashamed, maybe she didn't even have the money to get home. Lots of different reasons. But she was found dead of bronchopneumonia with acute and chronic alcoholism as a contributing factor. And guess where she was found dead? Yes, in Marino's flat, right next door to his bar, The Mermaid. Marino would later tell District Attorney Samuel Foley that the Carlson woman had been a habituate of his place, and knowing that she was a destitute, he had provided a home for her. Oh, makes himself sound so lovely, doesn't he? Well, Marino had actually convinced Mabel to take out a life insurance policy on herself for $2,000, around about $45,000 today, and that she should name him as the beneficiary. The night that Mabel died was bitterly cold. Marino is said to have force-fed her alcohol, which on its own is bad enough. Then he stripped her clothes, doused the poor woman in ice water, and after pushing her bed underneath an open window, left her there. That's another level of twisted. Marino was able to collect the insurance money with no problems. And for the time being, he got away with it. Made it seem really simple. Not sure it would be that simple today. Hopefully not. So the group took out 3 policies on Malloy in December 1932, giving him the new name of Nicholas Mallory. Given Pasqua's connections, it would be easy for the group to get a forged death certificate for the fictitious man. Red Murphy was nominated to be on the paperwork, listed as Joseph Mallory, brother of Nicholas and sole beneficiary. One of the policies taken out was with MetLife, and that was for around $800, and then there were 2 taken out with the Prudential for $494 each, so around $18,000 and $10,000 in today's money. There was, however, a bonus clause that stated the payouts would be doubled if the death was accidental. Yeah, it's a real thing. This double indemnity, as it was called, was actually at the heart of a now infamous murder in New York that involved Queen's housewife Ruth Snyder and her lover Henry Judd Gray, a corset salesman, who in 1927 murdered her husband Albert. Yeah, they passed it off as a burglary gone awry. Now in this case, Ruth had also persuaded Albert to take out life insurance, and his had an extra payout if his death were violent. Henry and Ruth were easily caught. Shame. And both were sent to the electric chair. It was a very high-profile case, and it actually inspired the novel Double Indemnity and the classic noir thriller movie of the same name. Borrowing the line from Jesus' crucifixion, Ruth's last words were, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Oh, so dramatic. Now, back to Malloy. And in order to split the $3,500, which is just under $80,000 today, the trust would have to bring about the untimely accidental demise of Malloy and pass him off as Mallory. Although the amount was almost irrelevant, as it would cost a lot to get rid of Malloy. Now, I've seen the events told in slightly different orders, but the beginning and the end are the same. So here we go. The trust figured the easiest way to get rid of Malloy was to remove the brakes, so to speak, on his drinking, which, given that his thirst was that immense and his buying power was limited, was a fair assumption. But when the good stuff didn't do the trick, they tried the bad and the really bad stuff. So as to not arouse suspicion about giving Malloy a free tab, Marino told him that competition in the area was extremely fierce and he just needed bodies in his bar. Given Malloy's generally inebriated state, he bought the story, unsurprisingly really. And he thought nothing of his upgrade from being cold and homeless to the top barfly. The trust even gave him a back room to sleep in at the bar. Well, their thinking was probably when the alcohol does finally kill him, we need to know where he is. Now, throwing himself into his new role as top barfly, Malloy would literally drink until he couldn't anymore, and he'd just tell Marino he'd be back tomorrow. He never suspected his friends were trying to kill him, or that they were just gaslighting him about their friendship. Bless him. I suppose he was just happy to not have the bum's rush anymore, which is a swift and forcible ejection from somewhere. You'd think the cartoon style being thrown out through the swinging saloon doors. Now Malloy was so happy that he even unquestioningly signed papers that he was told were a petition to get Marino elected for local office. But can you guess what they really were? Oh yes, insurance papers. And with the trust relying on the fact that Malloy would get so drunk that he would choke on his own vomit, but it obviously wasn't happening as quickly as they'd like. Realistically, how quickly did they think it was going to happen? But what the trust hadn't counted on was this sick, weak alcoholic was actually damn near indestructible. And this is why he later garnered the nickname Rasputin. Now Rasputin, as I'm sure many of you know, was a Russian monk whose enemies took many attempts to kill him before finally succeeding. The trust decided to change tactic as the alcohol was taking too long. First, they would substitute the alcohol, after a few drinks of course, with antifreeze. Yep. And this had no effect. Yes, you heard me, no effect. Malloy would drink and drink, pass out, wake up, rinse and repeat the next day. So with the antifreeze proving useless, the trust tried turpentine, which is used for thinning oil-based paints and a raw material for the chemical industry, to name but a few. Wonderful sounding stuff. But still, Malloy didn't die. I know, I'd be long gone. Next was horse liniment, which is a medication that's massaged into horses' skin to provide either a heating or cooling sensation, which eases pain, reduces inflammation, and stimulates blood flow. So kind of like deep heat or deep ice for horses. Wouldn't fancy drinking that, would you? No. Well, Malloy did. Still didn't die. So next, the trust tried something that's, well, just by the sound of it, should have worked. Rat poison. Surely this time. No. Nope. Rat poison did not kill Michael Malloy. So the group is scratching their heads. So what's going on? This man, why is he not dying? I'm not laughing about the fact that a man's not dying, but you can just imagine them being like, I don't get it. What? We're literally giving him things that no human should be able to tolerate, and he's chugged the lot, asked for more, had more, passed out, fine. What? Now, Pasqua claimed to have seen a man die after eating oysters and whiskey. So another collective light bulb went off over the trust's head. So they soaked raw oysters, already in wood alcohol. Now, wood alcohol is also known as methanol, and it can be used as, amongst many other things, marine and automobile fuel. Please excuse my tummy, it keeps going off, it's digesting my tea. Chicken Kiev if you want to know. Now, wood alcohol had caused more than 50,000 deaths in the previous few years, and if it didn't kill you, it was said to undoubtedly cause blindness. Unless, that is, you're Michael Malloy. Seems the old adage, what you don't know can't hurt you, definitely applied to this man. After ingesting the whole plate, Malloy still did not die. In fact, he didn't just have one plate, oh no, he had several. And the only thing that happened? A big stinking burp. Yep, that's it. So we'd all probably be 6 foot under. No, Malloy's just had a snack. To be fair, that one makes me feel kind of sick. Just raw oysters on its own. Blah. So then Red tried another food-based assassination on Malloy. He left a tin of sardines to rot. And I mean, sardines are an acquired taste anyway. But Red added some extras. Yeah, not sure you'll guess these ones, but we have carpet tacks, poison, unsure of the specifics, and it's even said that Red chopped and finely ground the tin can the sardines came in, and added this as well. Unsurprisingly at this point, the sandwich had no effect on Malloy. And to add insult to injury to the trust, he asked for another one. I bet their heads nearly exploded. It's supposed to kill you. You're not supposed to want more. They had even been substituting his regular shots of whiskey and gin with straight wood alcohol, obviously again after giving him a couple just to get the taste in. Yeah, we're not talking about a little splash added to his drink. We're talking about full-on shots, plural. Now, I've heard of strong constitutions, but this is another level. I mean, this man is a full-on medical mystery, or marvel. I mean, he drank it all and still came back for more. The wood alcohol consumption continued for days, and the only effect it had on Malloy was drunkenness. One night, he did fall to the floor, much to the trust's excitement, you can imagine, and his breathing did appear to be slowing. They're thinking this could finally be it, and as they briefly, collectively held their breath, they very quickly let out a collective sigh of disappointment when Malloy started snoring. Yep, that's right. He was just passed out on the floor. There he had a few hours kip, and then he awoke asking for a drink. Michael Malloy, man or machine? You decide. So it was at this point that the trust surmised that anything they gave Malloy to ingest was probably not going to kill him. At least nothing that they could remotely pass off as accidental anyway. So they decided to change tactic and use something that had worked so well for Marino once before. Yes, they decided to try and freeze him to death. Given that it was winter, the temperatures often plummeted, and one particular night it was said to have reached an extraordinary minus 14 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 26 degrees Celsius. From what I could find online, certain parts of New York can normally reach between minus 15 and minus 18, but it's generally much milder. The trust decided that this night was their night. So they waited for Malloy to drink until he had almost passed out. Then they managed to stagger him into Crotona Park, which is behind the speakeasy, and they settled him on a bench. Once he was fully passed out, the group ripped open his ragged coat and shirt, and then they dumped 5 gallons of water over his chest and left him there. Such gentlemen. But to the trust's complete astonishment, when Marino went to open up the Mermaid the next day, he found Malloy curled up asleep in the basement. Dude still didn't die. It seems the cold, rather than finish him off, had woken him up, and he'd walked the half-mile-ish across the park back to the bar. And just to add insult to the trust, when Malloy woke up, he complained to Marino that he'd caught a cold and needed a drink. The next payment on the life insurance policies was due, but by now the trust were angry and fed up. What they thought was going to be an easy job had turned into somewhat of a nightmare. Now it was beyond the money, and it was about pride. Malloy just needed to die. Harry Green originally offered John McNally and James Salone $200, then $400 to run Malloy over, so roughly $4,700 and $6,900 today, but both said no. So Green and his taxi would just have to do. Once heavily inebriated, the trust bundled Malloy into the taxi and drove away from the speakeasy. Well, at least they weren't dumb enough to just do it outside. Red and Bastone held Malloy up with the plan that they would jump out of the way at the last second and that the taxi would hit Malloy. Well, even completely off his face, Malloy managed to avoid the first 2 attempts. Well, the expression is third time's a charm, so... And on the 3rd attempt, Green was said to drive at Malloy at around 50 miles an hour, and this time there were 2 thirds. A loud one and a softer one, which was the body hitting the bonnet and then the floor. Just to be on the safe side, because after all this man seemingly would not die, Green reversed over Malloy. They were all convinced that he was finally dead, but were spooked by a passing car and scattered before they could check. Now the trust, presuming that he was dead, scoured the papers for any reports of a body found or man found after accident. Unable to find anything, although certain that this was it, the trust could not collect the policy. No body, no death certificate, no money. But, in yet another twist of fate, Malloy was still not dead. He had been found on January the 30th by the side of the road between Baychester Avenue and Gun Hill Road in the Bronx. He'd been taken to Fordham Hospital, where it was discovered that he had a broken shoulder, a concussion, and a potentially fractured skull. Just a few weeks later, and Malloy would march back into the speakeasy, telling the trust that he was dying for a drink. Dying for a drink. They're like, no, but I wish you would. I bet their jaws all hit the floor. Kind of wish I was a fly on the wall. And other than being bandaged and having a bit of a limp, Malloy didn't look too bad considering. Now, whilst Malloy was in the hospital, it seems the trust tried to take another down on his luck Irishman and pass him off as Nicholas Malloy. February the 7th, 1933, a man was found battered and bloodied in Austin Place, South Bronx. And guess what he had in his pocket? Nicholas Malloy's ID. How bizarre. Wonder how that could have possibly got there. This man turned out to be Joseph Patrick Murray, a 31-year-old out-of-work plasterer who had fallen on hard times. He would later be found, unfortunately, in a depression colony next to Hudson Parkway. Although it can't be verified, Joseph was thought to be Patrick Joseph Murray from Catteron, County Sligo, whose wife was Mary from Cloonshire, County Mayo. Murray suffered internal injuries, broken ribs and a broken left shoulder. But he did seem to have some of the luck of Malloy on his side because he didn't die either. The trust had failed. Again. But this time, they'd gotten a bit sloppy. So when he awoke, Murray remembered getting drunk at a speakeasy in Harlem on the 7th of February. And then he was offered a free lift and free booze by a taxi driver who already had 2 men in the back of his taxi. Now this driver was familiar to Murray. It was none other than Harry Green. There was also a witness who saw Murray get knocked down by the car, and this person had the wherewithal to get the taxi's license plate. Yes! And of course, it was Harry Green's. Moron. Just another great example of why we love a dumb criminal on this podcast. Dumb criminals. So whilst Murray was recovering in Lincoln Hospital, the trust knew they had to finish Malloy off once and for all. Now it's quickly worth mentioning 2 of the other attempts that didn't make it into the main story. There was a botched attempt with a machine gun. Yep, I'm quite curious about that one really. But Malloy escaped. And they even tried straight out bashing him on the head. The accidental aspect quickly seems like it went out the window. And this brings us to February the 22nd, 1933. And the trust at this point had been trying to kill Malloy for months, with one report stating that they had spent an estimated $1,875 out of the $3,500 that they planned to cash in just to get rid of Malloy. So that left around $1,625 to split 5 ways. Even with the value back then, was it really worth it? So as usual, the trust waited for Malloy to pass out. Some reports say they took him to Red's room, others to a hotel on Fulton Avenue, about half a mile from the bar. Now it is entirely plausible that the hotel room and Red's room were the same place. Who knows? Now this was allegedly the 10th attempt on Malloy's life, but there were estimates of it being double. But even 10 is impressive. Once in the hotel room, the trust took one end of a hose attached to a gas lamp and put it into Malloy's mouth. They bound it tightly with a rag so it wouldn't move, and they turned it on. This time, unfortunately, they were finally successful. Malloy was dead within the hour. Some say as quickly as 20 minutes. The next morning, Dr. Frank Manzella, for a $100 fee, filed the fraudulent death certificate stating Malloy, or Mallory, had died of lobar pneumonia. and also the false claim that the man had twice recently been to the doctor's office complaining of gripe, which is a pinching spasmodic intestinal pain. And this was listed, therefore, as a contributing factor on the certificate. Pasquale wrote an impressive $400 check to impress the insurance agents that he was going to throw a lavish funeral for his friend. But in reality, Pasquale buried Malloy in a $10 coffin and a $12 grave, even skipping the embalming process because he deemed it too expensive. The trust cashed the first $800 policy with no problems, but Pasquale was told he'd have to wait until they had the rest of the settlement for his payment. Bastogne allegedly complained way too much about his meagre share, and so it may be no surprise that on the 18th of March, Bastogne was shot dead outside the Mermaid. Joseph Maglione was charged with his murder, and Red Murphy was taken as a material witness. Suspicions were raised when the Prudential couldn't track down beneficiary Joseph Malloy to pay out to. Now, it was no secret in the Mermaid about the trust's wrongdoings, and that quickly spread around the Bronx. With the rumours around town, and then Bastogne's murder, the police quickly became suspicious, and when they realised Michael Malloy had died on the night in question, they had him exhumed from his cheap grave. Now, this is where Pasquale would regret cheaping out on the embalming. Yeah, fatal rookie mistake. You see, the embalming fluid would have removed all traces of the gas. But, as he hadn't done it, Malloy's skin still bore the red flush of carbon monoxide poisoning. Toxicology was a burgeoning science in New York in the 30s, and Dr. Hockman performed a full examination of the body and ruled the cause of death officially as asphyxiation by carbon monoxide. Game over. The trust were arrested on the 12th of May. McNally and Sloan were listed as material witnesses. Maglione managed to get his murder charge for Bastogne down to manslaughter, so saving himself from the electric chair by testifying against the trust. There is no honour amongst thieves. Green managed to reduce his charges to first-degree assault by also acting as a witness against the trust. Pasquale tried telling his lawyer that he was just the undertaker and nothing more. Their trial began in the October, and is often the way. The crooks turned on each other. The 4 members of the trust, bar Marino, claimed they were under the threat of Bastogne, saying he held them at gunpoint and threatened to kill them if they didn't kill Malloy and get him the insurance money. But District Attorney Samuel Foley was having none of it. He pointed out that Pasquale, in his desperation, confessed his role in May, 2 months after Bastogne was murdered. Marino, he tried a different tactic. He tried an insanity plea. He even brought his own doctor to the courthouse. This doctor said that a childhood accident alongside a recent illness, probably syphilis, lovely, meant he'd become abnormal. Yeah. Now, Foley had a neurologist brought in. Well done, that man. And they concluded that Marino was faking his abnormality. Could you imagine? On the 19th of October, 1933, all 4 men were found guilty of the murder of Michael Malloy. Whilst being transferred to Sing Sing prison, the 4 were said to actually be singing songs in the van, such as My Gal Sal. Singing to Sing Sing. And when they arrived at the prison, Kreisberg randomly told reporters, "It's a fine day for some people." Make of that what you will. On June the 7th, 1934, 28-year-old Marino, 29-year-old Kreisberg and 24-year-old Pasquale were executed by the electric chair. They were all relatively young men. Which, desperate times, desperate people. It's actually really sad. Marino left behind a wife and a child. Kreisberg left behind a wife and 3 children. And Pasquale left behind a relatively new wife. And ironically, the judge that had married Pasquale was also the one to sentence him to death. Poetic justice, anyone? A mere 2 hours before the execution, Red Murphy was granted a reprieve as he was mentally unbalanced. Which, given the time, that term doesn't mean much, does it? Now, it turns out that Joseph Red Murphy was actually born Archie Mott, and he had actually been committed to Connecticut School for Boys but then escaped a few years later. This information was actually discovered by another inmate, and prosecutor Samuel Foley actually pled for a stay of execution for Red. But Red was sadly denied. He was denied a retrial or further psychological testing, and he was executed on the 5th of July 1933, just a month after the others. Hershey Harry Green got 5 to 10 years. Dr. Frank Mansella only got 3 months for failing to report a suspicious death. Nothing for the fraud, then. 3 months. Now, Malloy's death actually made history in the Poisoner's Handbook. It was one of the first cases investigated by the newly established New York Medical Examiner's Office under pioneering Dr. Charles Norris. And in 2015, Irish-speaking channel TG4 aired a documentary called Name Your Poison about Malloy. Michael Malloy was finally laid to rest at Ferncliff Cemetery in Westchester County, New York. And to this day, people still lay flowers on his grave. Just a shame that he's 2,000 miles from home. But hey-ho, maybe some of his family heard his story and maybe they visit too. That's a really nice... I might just be making myself feel better with that nice thought, but hey, I don't care. I'm doing it. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. It really does help me with those pesky algorithms, so thank you in advance. As usual, you can find me on the socials at Seriously Now Pod. And for your content requests, seriously you stories, feedback, or just to say hi, it's seriouslynowpod@gmail.com. So until next time, lovelies, stay safe, stay free, and stay weird. Bye-bye.